Welcome to Archive Whispers, a place to fall asleep. Settle in, lower the lights, and let the archive open.
Tonight, the door we are going to open is a low wooden frame painted the color of old ochre, set into a round wall of felt on a wide and darkening plain, and beyond it there is nothing for a very long way but grass, and wind moving through the grass, and the slow gray light of a steppe evening settling down over everything, like a hand laid gently on the back of a sleeping animal. We are not going anywhere in a hurry. We are only going to stay here in one place for one night and let it grow dark around us. We are not here for any of the great rides or the famous names that this grassland has sent out into the wider world across the centuries. There will be no battles in what follows, no councils, no banners crossing a river at dawn. The herders whose evening we are borrowing did not think of themselves as part of any story large enough to be written down, and that, in its quiet way, is the whole point of the place we have chosen, because the things that filled their nights were small, and repeated, and worn smooth by long use. Like the handle of a wooden pail or the lip of a clay bowl passed from hand to hand for years. I should say, before we settle, that almost everything we will describe rests on the patient work of travelers and scholars who tried to set down what the herding life of these plains was actually like. A friar named William, sent across the grasslands in the middle of the 13th century, wrote of the round felt houses and the white mare's milk and the smoke rising through the roof, and much later careful students of the steppe, among them Owen Lattimore and Anatoly Kazanov and Caroline Humphrey, traced the long shape of that same life across the seasons. We are leaning on them gently, the way you might lean on a door frame while you take off your boots. What we will do then is simply imagine one ordinary family in one ordinary felt tent on an evening that could belong to almost any year across a very long stretch of time, because the rhythm of this life changed so slowly that a herder of one century would have recognized the gestures of another without a word of explanation. We will watch the animals come in from the grass, and the fire be fed, and the milk be turned, and the bowls be filled, and the light be lowered, and we will do it all at the pace it truly happened, which is to say slowly, with long pauses, and nothing waiting to be resolved. If you can, lower your own lights now, the way the family will lower theirs, a little at a time, until only the fire is left to see by. There is nothing here you are meant to hold on to. The names of the animals, the order of the chores, the small words said over the milk, these are not things to be remembered, only things to drift through, and if your eyes close somewhere along the way, before the fire has burned down to its last gray coals, then you will simply have arrived where the night was always going to take you. So let the wind be the first thing, the steady wind that never quite stops out here, running over the grass and around the curved felt wall and away again into the dark. And let the smell of smoke and warm milk and damp wool gather slowly under the low roof. And let the animals be somewhere out there in the blue dusk, moving home of their own accord. And let us begin very gently with the land itself, while there is still a little light left in the west to see it by. The land out here does not rise into anything you could call a mountain, not near the tent at least, but lies in long low swells, one rolling gently into the next, so that a person standing by the door can see for a very great distance in every direction, and what they see is mostly grass, pale and dry and silvered now in the failing light, bending all one way under the steady press of the evening wind. There are no fences, there are no walls, there is no edge to anything, only the slow curve of the earth going down at last into a darkening rim of sky. The tent stands where it stands for reasons that have nothing to do with chance, set a little below the crest of a rise so the worst of the wind passes over it, with its low door turned away from the cold quarter and toward the warmer south, near enough to water that the animals can be brought down to drink without a long walk, and far enough from the last camp that the grass here has had its season to grow back. A herding family does not build a place so much as choose one, and then unbuild it again when the grass is finished, and carry the whole of it away on the backs of the animals to somewhere the season is kinder. From a distance, the tent is a low, pale dome, almost the color of the grass itself. A circle of white-gray felt drawn over a frame of slender wooden lattice and painted poles, weighted and roped against the wind, with a dark crown at the top where the smoke finds its way out. It is round because the wind is everywhere, and a round wall gives the wind nothing to push against, no flat face to lean on, no corner to worry at, and so the gusts that come off the open plain simply slide around it and go on their way, leaving the felt to breathe and settle and barely stir. Out beyond the tent, scattered across the near slopes in the last of the light, the animals are beginning the slow business of coming home. No one has called them, not really, and no one is driving them. They have simply grazed their way through the long afternoon to the far edge of their wandering and have turned now, of their own old habit, back toward the place where the smell of smoke and people and the night's safety waits for them. They come unhurried, heads down, stopping often to pull at another mouthful, in no more of a rush than the evening itself. There are 5 kinds of animal that the herders count, and they speak of them together as the 5 snouts, or the 5 kinds of muzzle, as if they were one large and many-legged household, rather than 5 separate flocks. There are the sheep, soft and crowding and easily led, the goats, thinner and bolder, always at the front, always testing the edges, the cattle, slow and heavy and patient, the horses, kept a little apart and prized above all the rest, and the camels, tall and grave and few, folded somewhere at the margin of the camp like old furniture too large to bring inside. The horses are the ones the herders watch the longest, even now in the gathering dark, because the horses are the measure of the family's standing and the means of nearly everything else. The way you cross the great distances of the plain, the way you bring the rest of the animals together, the way you carry word from one camp to another across a day's hard riding. They stand off to one side in a loose band, a darker shape against the dark grass, their long tails turned to the wind, cropping quietly, lifting their heads now and then to look at nothing, or at something too far for any of us to see. The light is nearly gone from the grass now, though it lingers a while longer in the sky, a long pale wash of cold color low in the west, fading upward into the deep blue of the coming night. And against that last brightness, the moving animals show only as soft, dark shapes, their edges blurred by distance, and by the fine dust their hooves lift from the dry ground. The sound of them carries on the wind in pieces, a low complaint from a cow, the thin double note of a goat, the small steady clinking of the wooden bells some of them wear at the throat, none of it hurried, all of it folding into the larger sound of the wind. Near the tent, the ground tells the story of the camp without a single word. In the worn paths the animals have pressed into the grass coming and going to water, in the pale ring where an older tent once stood, and the grass has not yet fully healed, in the low dark heap of dried dung gathered and stacked for the fire, in the leather and the wooden gear hung on a frame to keep it off the damp earth. It is a light mark on the land, this camp, the kind of mark that a season of rain and new grass will quietly erase. And the herders mean it to be so, for they will want this ground again in a year or two, grown back and clean. The dried dung is the fire of this country, and there is no apology in it and no poverty either, only the plain good sense of a land with almost no trees, where the animals that give milk and wool and meat also give, at the end of it, a clean burning fuel that the family gathers through the warm months and stacks and dries against the cold. It burns slow and low and almost without flame once it has caught, a deep steady heat with a faint sweet smell of grass gone through the animal and come out the far side, and it is this, more than wood, that the long nights of the steppe are warmed by. As the animals draw closer to the camp they begin, without being told, to sort themselves into their old familiar places, the milking ewes and the nanny goats drifting toward the long low line where they will be tied in pairs for the evening, the lambs and kids that have been kept apart all day calling now in their high thin voices for the mothers they can smell but not yet reach, the cattle settling heavily a little further out, the horses staying off at their distance as horses always do. There is a great deal of soft noise in all of this, and almost none of it is sharp. The lambs and the kids have spent the day in their own small enclosure of woven cord and felt near the tent, too young and too valuable to be let out onto the open grass, where the day's grazing might scatter them or a wandering animal might take them, and they have spent it, mostly, asleep in a soft heap, waking to cry a little and then sleeping again. Now, as the mothers return, the whole tangle of them comes awake at once, and the air fills with a chorus of small voices answering larger ones, the high and the low calling across the few yards of dusk between them, until the right pairs find each other in the dark. Somewhere in the middle of all this quiet arriving, a dog moves through the camp. One of the big, shaggy, dark dogs that keep the night watch out here, going from the tie line to the tent and back again at a slow trot, nose down, checking the edges of things, and then settling at last in a worn hollow near the door, with its back to the felt and its face to the open plain, where it will lie through most of the night with its eyes half closed, lifting its head only when the wind brings it something it does not like the sound of. The wind drops a little as the full dark comes on, the way it often does at the turning of the day, easing from the long, steady press of the afternoon into something gentler and more uncertain, coming now in slow breaths with quiet between them, so that for a moment the whole plain seems to hold still and listen, and then to breathe out again. In those small silences the other sounds step forward, the tearing of grass, the shift of a heavy body lying down, the wooden knock of one bell against a horn, the far short bark of the dog, each one clear and round and separate in the held quiet, before the wind returns and gathers them all back up. Inside the tent, though we have not gone in yet, a fire has been woken from its banked coals, and its light has begun to leak out through the smoke hole at the crown and along the thin, bright seam of the door, so that the pale dome which a moment ago was almost invisible against the dark grass now glows faintly from within. Like a coal itself half buried in ash, the one warm point in a great cold circle of plain and sky. It is toward that glow that everything out here is quietly turning. The animals, the dog, the last of the light, and now, at last, us. We will go in soon, and stay in for the rest of the night, in the close warm round of felt and firelight where the family is gathering now to its evening. But it is worth standing here a moment longer in the cold, just outside the door, to feel the size of the dark we are about to step out of. The great unlit plain running away on every side under a sky that is filling, even as we watch, with more stars than a person who has only seen a town sky could easily believe. Out here there is nothing to dim them, and they come on slowly, a few and then many, and then more than the eye can easily hold, until the whole black dome is dense with them. So let us lift the heavy felt flap at last, and stoop a little to pass under the low painted lintel, the way everyone must, even the tallest, so that entering this house is always a small act of bowing, and step over the raised wooden threshold that you are never meant to tread upon, and come in out of the wind into the other world that waits a single layer of felt away, where it is warm and dim and golden, and the long night indoors is only just beginning. Inside, the first thing is the warmth, a soft enveloping warmth that meets you at the door like a held breath, and the second thing, half a moment behind it, is the light, which is not bright but is everywhere. A low, even golden light thrown up from the fire at the center onto the pale felt of the walls and the pale felt of the roof, so that the whole round room seems to glow gently from its own surfaces, with no hard shadow anywhere and no dark corner, because in a round house there are no corners at all. The shape of the room is held up by things you can read at a glance once you know how to look. Around the lower wall runs the lattice, several sections of crossed wooden slats opened out like the folds of a fan and lashed end to end into a circle, springy and light, the kind of thing that folds flat to nothing when the camp moves and springs open again at the next. From the top of this lattice, the long, slender roof poles rise inward and upward, each one set into the wooden crown at the center of the roof, so that the whole ceiling is a wheel of fine straight spokes turning around the dark open hub where the smoke goes out. Over this frame of wood the felt is laid, layer upon layer of it. Thick gray-white felt rolled and beaten out of the wool of the very sheep that stand outside in the dark, pressed and soaked and rolled again until the loose fleece becomes a dense warm hide of cloth, and then drawn over the frame in great curved pieces and roped down tight against the wind. In the cold months there will be more layers, in the warm months fewer, the lower edge lifted to let a breeze run through. The house thickens and thins with the seasons, the way an animal grows and sheds its coat. At the very center of the floor, directly beneath the open crown, is the hearth, and everything else in the round room arranges itself around it, the way the roof poles arrange themselves around the crown above, in a quiet order that no one has to think about, because everyone was born knowing it. The fire sits in a low iron cradle or a ring of stones, with a three-legged stand above it to hold the blackened pot. And from this single point the warmth and the light and the slow smoke all rise together, straight up, toward the dark hole in the roof and the cold stars beyond it. The floor itself is the bare earth of the plain, swept smooth and packed hard by years of feet, and over the part of it where people sit and sleep are laid felts and skins, layer on layer, soft and warm to the touch, the color of cream and old tea and dark hide, worn thin in the places most used and thick still at the edges. To sit on the floor of such a house is to sit on the wool of the flock laid over the skin of the earth, with nothing between you and the ground but the warmth the animals gave, and it is a low, warm, comfortable way to sit, made for long evenings that go nowhere. There is an order to the round of the wall, too, an old understood map of where things and people belong, and though it is never marked or spoken, it is followed all the same. The far side of the tent, opposite the door, is the honored place, where the oldest and most respected sit, and where the few precious things of the family are kept. One side of the room belongs more to the men and to the gear of the herd and the hunt, the ropes and saddles and tools. The other belongs more to the women and to the work of the hearth, the pails and bowls and skins of milk. The door faces south, and the whole quiet geometry turns on that. On the men's side hang the things a herder cannot do without. The long coiled hair ropes braided from the manes and tails of the horses, the wooden saddle with its high front and back worn smooth and dark by long riding, the bridles and hobbles and the long pole with a loop of cord at its end that is used to catch a horse out of the running herd. They hang on pegs set into the lattice, off the damp ground, swaying very slightly when someone passes, and each of them has its own place to which it is always returned, because in a house that may be folded up and carried away at any season, a thing without a place is a thing soon lost. On the women's side, nearer the door, stand the vessels of the milk, and there are a great many of them, for milk in its many forms is the heart of what this household eats and drinks, and each form needs its own kind of holding. There are the tall wooden pails for the carrying and the catching, the wide low basins for the settling of the cream, the round-bellied skin bags for the souring and the churning, the small clay and wooden bowls from which everyone drinks, and over them all hangs the faint, clean, sour smell of milk in every stage of its long, slow change, a smell that never leaves the felt, and that the children of this house will know all their lives as the smell of home. Hung near the place of honor, or resting against the lattice where it will not be knocked, is the one thing in the tent made for no use at all but listening, a two-stringed fiddle with a horse carved at the top of its long neck, its small square body covered in skin, its bow loose-haired and worn. It is not played every night, and it is not played loudly when it is, but on some evenings, when the work is done and the bowls are filled, someone will take it up and draw from it a low, rough singing tone that seems to come from somewhere out on the plain, rather than from the box of wood itself, and the room will go still around it. The family itself is here now, gathered in from the cold and the dark of the chores into the close warm round, and there are more of them than the small house would seem to hold, 3 generations folded into one circle of felt, the old and the grown and the very young, but the round room takes them all without crowding. because everyone knows where to be and how to fold themselves down small, knees drawn up, backs to the lattice, faces to the fire. We will not look closely at any of their faces. They are turned to the firelight, and that is enough. The oldest of them sits in the honored place at the back, nearest the precious things, wrapped in a heavy quilted coat against a cold that the fire does not quite reach there, hands folded, doing very little, saying less. Watching the fire and the room with the slow patience of someone who has watched a great many such evenings and knows exactly how this one will go. The young ones are nearest the warmth, almost in the fire's lap, and between the two ends of life the grown ones move and settle, carrying the work of the evening on their unhurried hands. The fire is fed now for the evening, and the feeding of it is its own small, unhurried ceremony, the dried cakes of dung laid on one at a time, not heaped, so that the heat stays even and the smoke stays thin, each new cake set carefully where the old one has fallen to embers. The whole low glow tended with a long-handled iron, or simply with a practiced hand that knows how near it can go. There is no roar to this fire, and there are almost no flames. Only a deep red-gold breathing in the iron cradle, brightening when it is fed and sinking slowly back, the pulse by which the whole evening keeps its time. Above the fire, in the dark open eye of the crown, the night shows through, a small round window onto the deep blue and the first hard stars, and the thin smoke climbs toward it in a slow gray column that bends and breaks, and gathers again as the draft shifts, never hurrying, drawn up and out into the cold and gone. Sometimes a single spark rides up the column and winks out before it reaches the opening. Sometimes a breath of the outside air comes down the same way and stirs the flames and is gone. The house breathes through that hole, in and out, all night long. It is very quiet in here, but it is not silent, and the quiet is made of small, steady sounds rather than of the absence of them. The faint settling tick and breath of the fire, the creak of the wooden frame easing in the cold, the soft give of felt as someone leans back against the wall, the long, low sound of the wind running over the outside of the dome, muffled now to a deep and distant hush by the thickness of the wool. All of it together makes a kind of held warm hum, the sound a house makes when nothing is wrong and no one is in a hurry, and the night has only to be passed. This is the whole of the house, then, this single round room a few paces across, and it holds everything a family needs to live well through a night and a season and a life. The fire and the food and the gear and the bedding and the few cherished things and all the people, gathered close enough to touch, warm enough to drowse, in a circle of wool pitched on the open grass under a wheel of stars. There is nothing else, and there is nothing missing. We will spend the rest of the night here, and watch the small work of the evening unfold, and let the fire and the milk and the low voices carry us down toward sleep. Before the family can fully settle, there is the evening milking to be done. And so one of the grown ones rises, takes up a wooden pail, draws a heavy coat close, and goes back out through the felt flap into the cold, and we will follow, just for a little while, to watch the last work of the day done by the light of the rising stars. The animals are at their tie line now, the ewes and the nanny goats standing patient in the dark, breathing out small clouds, and the work of drawing the milk from them is done quietly, by feel more than by sight, with hands that have done it 10,000 times. The milking goes down the line one animal at a time. The lamb or kid led up first to start the mother's milk, and then drawn gently back. The rest taken into the pail in a thin, steady stream that rings at first against the bare wood, and then sighs as the milk deepens and the foam rises. And the warm smell of it lifts into the cold air and is carried off at once by the wind. It is not a great quantity from any one animal, a little from each, but there are many, and the pail grows heavy slowly and is carried back warm and steaming to the tent, to be poured off and begun upon while the next is filled. Back inside, the milk begins at once its long, slow journey of becoming, for almost nothing in this house is drunk fresh, and almost nothing is wasted, and the warm pail milk is poured through a cloth into the wide, low basins to settle, where overnight the cream will rise and be lifted in the morning, and some is set by the fire to warm and sour, and some is poured into the great churning skin that hangs by the door, And from these few beginnings will come, over the days, a whole quiet larder of things, the skimmed and the soured, the dried and the curded, the clear and the cloudy. The great skin by the door is the churn, a tall bag of hide hung from a wooden frame, and into it through the warm months goes the milk of the mares, which is gathered in small amounts many times a day, and poured in and left to sour and stirred again, hundreds of strokes by whoever passes, so that the churning is never finished and never really begun, but goes on as a kind of background to all the other work. The long wooden plunger lifted and dropped, until the milk turns to the pale, faintly sharp, faintly fizzing drink that is the great refreshment of the summer plains. This soured mare's milk is poured out for guests and family alike into the small bowls and drunk slowly through the evening, never gulped, passed, and received with both hands or the right hand alone in the old polite way. And it has about it a taste that is hard to forget once known, cool and sharp and a little wild. More like a thin, pale ale than like milk, faintly stinging at the edges of the tongue, and it carries with it the whole green smell of the summer grass that the mares have turned, through their bodies, into something a person can drink. From the milk of the cattle and the sheep and the goats comes the other half of the larder, the part that is meant to keep, for the great problem of a herding life is not the getting of food in summer, when the animals are fat and the milk is plentiful, but the holding of it through the long, hard winter when the grass is dead and the animals give little, and so the summer's surplus is dried and hardened into forms that will last, set out on the roof of the tent in the sun, turned and watched, until they are hard as wood and will keep for months in a bag. There are the small, hard curds, white and sour and tooth-breaking, that are sucked rather than chewed, and that soften slowly in the mouth on a long ride. There is the dried skin of the boiled cream, folded and kept. There is the pressed and dried cheese in pale cakes. There is the clear yellow butter oil rendered out and stored in a skin against the deep cold, and all of it, taken together, is the wealth of the household as surely as the animals are, the summer caught and held and folded away, a wall of food built quietly against the winter that everyone here knows is coming, because it always is. Meat is the winter food, not the summer one, and there is little of it tonight, for a herder does not kill lightly an animal that is still giving milk and wool and young, and so through the warm months the family lives almost entirely on the white foods, the milk and its many children, and saves the red food for the cold. When an animal is taken at the start of winter and frozen whole by the weather itself, and cut from through the dark months. Tonight there is only a little dried meat, shaved thin into the pot, more for the savor of it than the substance, a thread of the coming winter laid into the summer's milk. The pot over the fire holds the evening's tea, which is not the thin, clear drink of other countries, but a thing closer to a broth, brick tea broken off and boiled hard in water and milk together. Salted, sometimes thickened with a spoon of toasted grain or a knob of the butter oil, stirred and ladled high to cool it and poured back. Again and again, until it is the smooth, pale tan color of the felt walls and the whole tent smells of it. It is drunk in great quantity, bowl after bowl, all through the day and the evening, and it is warmth and food and drink and welcome all in one steaming cup. The bowls go round, then, the tea poured first for the oldest, and then outward through the circle in the proper order, each bowl taken in cupped hands and held a moment for the warmth before it is drunk. And a little of the first pouring is flicked up toward the smoke hole or touched to the fire as a small old offering to the powers of the sky and the hearth, a gesture so worn by habit that the hand makes it almost before the mind has noticed, the milk given back, a drop of it, to the place all the milk and grass and weather ultimately came from. While the tea is drunk, the simple food of the evening is set out, not a meal so much as a slow grazing of small things passed from hand to hand. A bowl of the hard dried curds to be sucked, some of the pale cheese broken into pieces, perhaps a flat round of dough cooked quickly on the iron or fried in a little of the butter oil. And the eating of it is unhurried and unceremonious, talk and chewing and the passing of bowls all folded together, no one waiting to begin and no one marking when it ends, the food simply there to be reached for as long as anyone is hungry. and then quietly gone. The very young ones are fed and grow heavy-eyed by the fire, and one of them is already asleep where it sits, fallen sideways against an older knee with the sudden completeness of small children, a half-eaten piece of curd still loosely in one hand, and no one moves it or wakes it, for there is nowhere it needs to be and nothing it needs to do, and it will be lifted later, when the bedding is laid out, and carried the few feet to its place without ever quite waking. The firelight moves on its sleeping face, and the talk goes quietly on above it, and it sleeps the deep, untroubled sleep of a child in a warm and crowded room. Outside, the milking finished and the pail brought in, the animals have gone fully quiet, settled at last into the long stillness of the night. The ewes folded down in a pale crowd, the cattle lying heavy and chewing, the horses standing asleep on their feet out in the dark with one hind leg resting, and the dog making one last slow round of them all before returning to its hollow by the door. The work of the day is over now. Every animal counted and close, every vessel filled, and what remains of the evening is only the warm, slow business of letting the night come on and carry everyone down into sleep. The one who went out to milk comes back in now for the last time, lets the heavy flap fall closed against the cold, stamps the chill from their feet on the bare earth just inside the door, and crosses to the fire to crouch a moment with both hands held out to the low red glow, the cold of the outside still on their coat and in their breath, before settling at last into the circle. With that, the door is shut for the night, the whole household is gathered in, and the felt house draws closed around its warmth, like a hand closing gently around a small flame. Now begins the long middle of the evening, the part that has no task in it and no hurry, the hours between the finishing of the work and the laying out of the beds, and these are the hours the felt house is really for, the warm, idle gathered hours when there is nothing to do but be together in the light of the fire and let the night pass. The bowls are refilled, the backs are eased against the lattice, the coats are loosened in the warmth, and the talk, which never entirely stopped, settles into the low, unhurried current that will carry the family along until sleep. The talk is not of great things. It is of the grass, which is thinning on the eastern slopes and will not last many more days, of a ewe that has gone lame and must be watched, of the weather, read off the look of the sunset and the behavior of the animals and the smell of the wind, and judged, as it always is, against the long memory of other years, of where the next camp should be, and when the move should come, of a horse that strayed and was found, of nothing at all sometimes, only the easy murmur of voices in a warm room, words half listened to, answers half given, the sound of company more than the sense of it. The land beyond the felt is held in everyone's mind even as they sit, for a herding family carries the geography of its grazing, the way a townsman carries the streets of his town, and in the talk of the grass and the camps there is a whole map being drawn and redrawn, the good wells and the poor ones, the slopes that catch the early sun and lose the snow first, the hollows that hold water and the ridges that catch the wind, the places where a previous winter went hard and the places that have always been kind. None of it is written. All of it is known and passed down and worn into the family's memory like a path worn into the grass. After a while, in one of the natural quiets that open in the talk, the oldest one begins, without being asked and without ceremony, to tell something, and the something is half a story and half a memory and half a piece of old advice, the way such tellings always are, a thing about a winter long ago when the cold came early, or about an animal that was wiser than its keepers, or about the way a certain thing should be done and why, and the voice that tells it is unhurried and low, and falls into the slow rocking rhythm of a thing told many times before, and the room arranges itself quietly to listen. The stories of this country are full of horses and journeys and the wide plain, of clever younger sons and patient old herders, of weather and luck and the keeping of one's word, and they are not told to thrill but to settle, to lay down again the old shape of how the world is and how a person ought to move through it, and they end, mostly, not in triumph, but in a return. The wanderer come home, the lost animal found, the long winter at last giving way to the green. so that even the telling carries the deep rhythm of the herding year itself, the going out and the coming back, the loss and the slow recovery. When the telling is done and the quiet has held a moment after it, someone reaches over and takes up the two-stringed fiddle from where it leans against the wall, settles it upright on one knee, tightens the loose bow a little, and draws across the strings a first long note that is rough and breathy and not quite in tune until the second pass. When it finds itself and opens out into a slow rising melody that seems to lean against the wind even here inside the felt, a tune with the gait of a walking horse in it, swaying, unhurried, going on and on across an inner distance. The sound of the fiddle is a strange and beautiful thing in the small warm room, for it is a music made in the image of the open country, all long sliding notes and held breaths and falling phrases, with none of the bright quick steps of a town tune, and it fills the felt house without crowding it, the way the wind fills the plain. And under it the fire ticks and the wind hushes against the outside of the wall, and the very young ones, those still awake, go still and round-eyed, and the old one closes both eyes and rocks a very little, somewhere far away, in some other year, on some other night that sounded just like this one. Sometimes over the fiddle, a voice joins, low and unhurried, singing one of the long songs of the plain, the kind whose single notes are stretched out and bent and held for the length of a slow breath, so that one short verse can take a great while to sing. The melody wandering up and lingering and sinking again like a hawk riding the air without a wing beat. And the words, when there are words, are simple and old, about a swift dark horse, about a mother far off, about the blue of the eternal sky, sung not to be performed but to be felt, by people who have heard them all their lives. The music ends not with a flourish, but by simply thinning away, the last long note allowed to fade until it is indistinguishable from the wind. The bow lowered, the fiddle set carefully back against the wall, and for a while no one speaks, because there is nothing that needs to be said, and the quiet after the music is part of the music still. The fire is lower now than it was. The bowls are nearly empty. The youngest are asleep, all of them, gone down one by one into the warm heap of the floor felts, and the night outside has deepened into its full black depth, the stars wheeling slowly and unseen above the closed felt roof. It is the part of the night now when the talk, what little is left of it, comes in single low remarks with long warm silences between them, a thing remembered and said and let go, a question asked and answered slowly or not at all. The fire watched more than the faces, and in those silences the small sounds of the house come forward again. The settling of the embers, the creak of the frame, the deep muffled breathing of the wind on the felt, the soft sounds of the sleepers, and the whole warm round seems to lean, very gently, toward rest. Out in the dark, the dog lifts its head once at some small sound the wind has carried, a far-off call of a night bird, perhaps, or the shift of an animal somewhere in the herd, and it holds still a moment, listening with its whole body, and then, finding nothing in it to trouble the night, lowers its head again onto its paws and lets out a long breath and is still. The animals do not stir. The horses sleep standing out under the stars. The plain holds its great cold quiet, and the one warm point of the tent glows on within it, small and steady and unafraid. Inside, one of the grown ones rises at last, quietly, and begins the small, unhurried work of turning the room from a place of evening into a place of sleep, drawing out the rolled bedding from where it is kept by day, the felts and the quilts and the skins, and laying them out in the proper places around the wall. The warmest spots near the fire for the youngest and the oldest, the cooler ones further round for those who keep the night's small watches, and the soft, heavy work of it is done almost in silence, by firelight and by long habit, the way a thing is done that has been done every night of a life. The sleeping children are gathered up one at a time, and carried the few short steps to their places, and laid down without ever fully waking. A small protest, a turning, a settling deeper into the warm, a quilt drawn up to a chin, a hand smoothing once over a head, and then stillness again, and the small, even breathing of deep sleep rising to join the larger breathing of the house. There is no fuss in any of it, no urging to bed, no resistance, only the slow natural sinking of a tired family toward the floor of its one warm room, gathered close around the dying fire under the felt and the stars. One by one the grown ones find their own places too, loosening their coats and lying down in them as they are. For the night will grow cold before morning and the fire will not last, drawing the heavy quilts up and turning toward the center where the last of the warmth is, until the whole circle of the family lies down around the low red eye of the fire like the spokes of the wheel above them, all turned inward, all breathing slow, and only one is left sitting up a little while longer to watch the fire down to a safe glow before lying down last of all. The deep of the night has come now, the hours when even the wind seems to sleep, easing to long, slow breaths and then, for whole stretches, to nothing at all. A stillness so complete that the smallest sounds travel a great way across the cold. The far single note of a night bird, the chewing of an animal lying near, the tick of the cooling fire. Each one set in a silence so wide that it seems less like the absence of sound than like a presence in its own right. The great patient quiet of the plain holding its breath under the stars. Above the felt roof, unseen by the sleepers but turning all the same, the great wheel of the sky has come fully out, more stars than there is darkness to hold them, the broad pale river of them spilled across the whole black dome from one edge of the plain to the other, and they are very bright and very cold and very still. And they have hung over this grassland exactly so for every night that any herder has ever lain beneath them. The same patterns, the same slow turning, the one unchanging roof above all the folding and unfolding of the felt ones below. The cold deepens as the night turns toward its lowest point, the warmth of the day long since given up by the ground and gone, a dry, hard cold settling over the grass and the sleeping animals and the felt of the tent, and the wool that covers the house earns its keep now. Holding the last of the fire's warmth close against the cold pressing in from every side, so that the round room stays a small warm island in the great cold sea of the night, its warmth slowly thinning toward morning but never quite running out. The bodies of the family and the embers of the fire feeding it from within. The last one awake sits a little apart from the sleeping circle, wrapped close, watching the fire come down. And this is an old and necessary care, for a fire left high in a felt house is a danger, and a fire let die entirely means a cold and difficult waking, and so the embers are watched down to just the right low glow. A few cakes worth of deep red heat banked together, and the gray ash drawn up around them to hold the warmth slow through the small hours, so that in the morning a breath and a handful of dry fuel will wake the whole thing again from the night's careful sleep. The embers banked, the watcher rises once, quietly, and lifts the edge of the door felt a hand's width to look out at the night and the animals, a last small round of the eyes before sleep, and the cold comes in at once around the ankles, sharp and clean, and out there the plain lies silver dark under the stars. The herd a scatter of pale still shapes, the horses standing where they stood, the dog lifting its head from its paws to meet the look and lowering it again, and finding all of it as it should be. The watcher lets the felt fall closed and turns back to the warmth. And then the watcher lies down too, last of all, in the place kept warm and waiting by the wall, drawing the heavy quilt up over a shoulder and turning, like all the rest, toward the dim red center of the room, and for a little while the eyes stay open, watching the faint glow move on the felt of the roof and the dark spokes of the poles. And the breathing of the sleepers fills the room, and the wind, returning now in a soft, slow breath outside, runs once around the curved wall and away, and the last waking mind in the felt house lets go of the day, at last, and follows all the others down. Now the whole household sleeps, every one of them, the old and the grown and the very young, lying close around the banked red coals in their circle of felt, and the only things still moving in all the warm, dark room are the slow rise and fall of the quilts with the breathing beneath them, and the faint shift of the embers settling lower. And outside the only things moving are the slow stars and the soft returning wind, and once in a long while, an animal changing its weight in its sleep. The great plain and the small house alike given over wholly to the night. The fire sinks lower through the small hours. the red of the coals deepening and dimming, the grey of the ash spreading, the warmth thinning very slowly outward from the center, and the room grows dimmer by the smallest degrees, the glow on the roof poles fading until the dark spokes are barely there. Until the crown overhead is only a faint round of slightly less black against the black, and the felt house settles deeper and deeper into the night, holding its warmth and its sleepers close, breathing slow, asking nothing, a small kept thing on the wide dark grass under the wheeling and indifferent and beautiful stars. And so we can leave them now, the sleeping family and the banked fire and the close warm felt, and draw back, very gently, out through the closed door and into the cold, where the dog lies curled with its nose under its tail, and the animals stand and lie in their pale, scattered stillness, and the great plain runs away unbroken under the stars. And we can look back once at the small dark dome with its single faint breath of warmth at the crown, the one lit coal of life in all that cold dark grass, and let it grow small behind us as the night goes on toward a morning that is still a long way off. And the wind, again, came up softly out of the dark and ran once around the curved felt wall and away, the way it had done all night, the way it would go on doing long after everyone in the small warm house had passed beyond the hearing of it. A slow and patient circling, neither rising nor falling, only going on. And the felt held still beneath it, and the sleepers did not stir, and the night went on. And the coals, again, sank a little lower in their bed of grey ash, the deep red of them dimming by a shade and then holding, banked and careful, giving out their slow last warmth into the dark room, and the faint glow they cast upon the felt of the roof grew fainter by the smallest measure, and was still there, and was enough. And the round house held its warmth close, and breathed its long, slow breath, and asked for nothing. There is nothing now that needs to be done, and nothing now that needs to be watched, and nothing now that needs to be remembered, only the warm dark and the slow breathing, and the faint red glow and the soft far circling of the wind. And if your own eyes have grown heavy by now, here in the warmth of the borrowed house, then let them close. The way the family's eyes have closed, one by one, into the deep and easy sleep of people who are exactly where they belong. Out on the grass the animals sleep as they have slept on this plain for longer than anyone can say. The sheep folded warm against one another in their pale crowd, the cattle lying heavy and still with their breath rising slow, the camels at the margin grave and motionless as low dark hills, and the horses, the prized and watchful horses, asleep at last out under the open stars, standing as they always stand, one resting a hind hoof, heads low, dreaming whatever it is that horses dream on the wide cold grass in the deep middle of the night. And the dog, again, lifted its head once from its paws, slow and unalarmed, and turned its ears a moment to the soft circling wind, and found in it nothing but the wind, and the grass, and the breathing of the herd, and the great familiar quiet of the night it had kept 1,000 times, and lowered its head once more onto its paws, and let out one long warm breath into the cold, and closed its eyes, and was still. The stars again turned their slow great wheel overhead, the pale river of them sliding by the smallest unfelt degree across the black. The same stars that had hung over the first felt tent ever raised on these plains, and would hang over the last, indifferent and beautiful and cold, wheeling on above the small, warm, sleeping house exactly as they wheeled above the empty grass 100 miles in every direction, asking nothing, marking nothing, only turning and turning through the long, deep middle of the night. Inside, the warmth held, thinning so slowly that no sleeper felt it go. The felt and the wool and the banked coals and the gathered bodies all keeping the cold at bay between them. And the breathing of the family rose and fell, each at its own slow pace, and all of it together making the deep soft sound of a house full of sleep. And over it the faint red glow of the coals lay on the roof poles like the last warm thought of the long day, dimming and holding and dimming and holding still. And so it would go, hour upon hour, until the first gray of the morning came at last into the east, and the cold reached its deepest, and one of them woke to wake the fire, But that is a long way off still, and not for us, and not for now. For now there is only the deep of the night, and the warm dark house, and the sleeping family, and the sleeping herd, and the soft circling wind, and the slow red coals, and the wheeling silent stars, and all of it at rest. Rest now, then, wherever you are, the way the felt house rests on the grass, and the grass rests under the wind, and the wind rests, for a while, between its slow, long breaths. There is nothing left tonight that needs your watching. The fire is banked. The animals are close. The door is closed against the cold. And the night will keep on, soft and slow and dark and warm, with you or without you, all the way through to a morning that will come, as it always comes, in its own unhurried time. And the wind again ran softly around the felt and away, and the coals again sank a little lower, and the stars again turned their slow cold wheel, and the small warm house held its sleepers close on the wide dark grass, and somewhere in the long middle of that night, with the fire down to its last red glow and the plain breathing slow all around, we let the steppe close gently over us, and slept.
You've reached the end of tonight's archive. If you're still awake, thank you for staying. And if you drifted off somewhere in the dark, then it did its work. Rest now. The next chapter will be here when you are. Sleep well. This has been Archive Whispers.